Today, I'm discussing the case of Katherine Mary Knight, who was the first woman in Australia's history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Katherine stabbed her lover John with a butcher knife at least 37 times on February 29, 2000. She then chopped him up, cooked him, and prepared to serve him to his own children. Katherine was born in Tenterfield, New South Wales, Australia on October 24, 1955. Her parents, Barbara and Ken Knight, had an affair that caused quite a scandal in their small town, which forced them to move town to where she was born. Barbara was already a mother of 4 boys from another man, and she even met Ken Knight through her husband. Katherine's childhood remained chaotic after that tumultuous start. Her father was a violent alcoholic who sexually assaulted her mother multiple times a day. Katherine herself claims she was sexually assaulted by several family members until she was 11. Katherine gained a reputation as a bully in school, often picking on smaller kids. She dropped out at 15 years of age without learning to read or write, opting to work in a clothing factory. In 1969, the Knight family moved back to Aberdeen, New South Wales, which is located north of Sydney, Australia. In 1971, she got her ideal job at a slaughterhouse, removing animals' internal organs. Her co-workers constantly praised her knife skills and work effectiveness. It was noticed that she appeared to find satisfaction in her duties. Katherine has had plenty of unsuccessful relationships in her personal life. She first met David Kellett while working at the butcher shop. They started dating soon after. David was known to be a heavy drinker who was prone to physical assaults. He would drink, then start fighting. However, when David would attempt to physically assault Katherine, she would always defend herself. In 1974, Katherine convinced David to marry her. Despite the hardships in their relationship, they chose to get married. David's troubles with alcoholism affected their marriage. On their wedding night, after being intimate, David fell asleep, leaving Katherine annoyed. She compared their experience to what she had heard from others, which made her disappointed when they only made love once before he fell asleep. This caused her to attempt to strangle him, but he awoke and was able to defend himself. Despite the fact that Katherine nearly killed David on their wedding night, they managed to stay married for a decade. During those years, they were blessed with 2 daughters. However, David did leave once during that time period. David secretly snuck out in the middle of the night in an attempt to leave Katherine. His departure pushed Katherine into a deep depression, eventually leading her to spend a couple of months in a psychiatric hospital. Before she was sent to the hospital, she confronted the mechanic who fixed David's car, threatening to kill him. Apparently, she was upset with the technician for repairing David's car, which eventually allowed David to escape Katherine. She became furious when she found out that the mechanic played a part in David's breakup with her. After she was discharged from the psychiatric hospital, she and David rekindled their relationship. Unfortunately, it was short-lived and they eventually parted ways. After Katherine and David had been apart for some time, Katherine met another man named David Saunders, and they started a relationship. Just a few months after they met, they somewhat moved in together. Everything happened very quickly, but he still kept his own apartment, so he was essentially living in 2 places at once. David wasn't ready to fully commit to living with Katherine. He enjoyed having his own space, which really upset Katherine. She thought he was leading a double life, keeping a whole other side of his world separate from hers. So Katherine suspected her partner of cheating, which angered her. This led her to extreme actions, such as taking their 2-month-old puppy during an argument. In a fit of rage, she shockingly slit the puppy's throat in front of David to demonstrate her capabilities. This disturbing behavior should have been a clear warning sign. Despite this, they eventually had a daughter together. Shortly after their daughter was born, an argument as usual took place between them, which escalated into a physical altercation. Katherine ended up stabbing David with a pair of scissors. The details of the fight remain unclear, and it is uncertain whether he reported the incident. This event ultimately led to the end of their relationship. After her breakup, Katherine found love again with a man named John Chillingworth. They got married and were together for 3 years and had a son together. Surprisingly, their relationship was calm and peaceful, and there were no reports of her exhibiting erratic behavior. That was until she left him for another man, whom she was having an affair with during her third marriage. Katherine was cheating on John with another man named John Price. John Price was 45 years old at the time. When their relationship first began, everything seemed to be going smoothly. They enjoyed going out together, socializing, and having drinks with friends at the local pub. John had 2 children from a previous marriage who lived with him. Although they were a bit older, they seemed to get along well with Katherine. They had no problems with her. John worked in the nearby mines, earning a decent income and doing quite well for himself. However, Katherine did propose the idea of marriage to John. Surprisingly, John declined, stating that he didn't think it was a good idea and that he wasn't interested in getting married. The moment he turned down the proposal, everything started to fall apart. Friends would notice that Katherine began to become very verbally abusive towards everyone. Mentally, she was always in her head. She would also become physically abusive towards John. Katherine's biggest flaw was her tendency to fight with vengeance whenever she was upset. It wasn't your typical argument with her. She was ruthless. Katherine was furious with John for not wanting to marry her, so she filmed him bringing a $20 first aid kit from work. She then sent the video to his boss, who believed it was theft and terminated John's employment. This made John extremely upset with Katherine's actions. In response, he asked her to leave the house they shared, which was actually owned by John. With John losing his job and Katherine being forced to leave, the situation became more complicated. Katherine and John had been separated for around 3 months, but Katherine had a knack for always finding her way back into the lives of the guys she dated. She began pressuring John incessantly to marry her, solely fixated on the idea of marriage. John stood his ground and refused, resulting in escalating arguments between them. Their friends and family began to observe and take notice of the strain in their relationship. Whenever there was a conflict between Katherine and John, John would confide in a friend about the situation. This served as a way to have a witness or someone who understood the truth of what was happening, in case Katherine tried to manipulate the situation and portray herself as the victim in their relationship. It was a smart move on John's part, ensuring that there was a record of the actual events. John eventually decided to call the police when he couldn't get Katherine to leave the house. He hoped they could help escort her out, but they informed him that he would need a court order to have her removed. In February 2000, Katherine and John got into a fight that resulted in John getting stabbed in the chest. Katherine claimed it was self-defense and reported John to the police for being violent towards her. She then obtained a restraining order against him. No matter the restraining orders, they always found themselves back together. John seemed to have an intuition that something was about to go down, as he openly shared with his co-workers that if he went missing or faced any trouble, it would be because of Katherine. He was very upfront about it. He also had a candid conversation with his boss, reiterating that Katherine was the cause of any possible incidents. He didn't hold back, labeling her as crazy. John again decided to take legal action against Katherine by going to court to have her removed from the house and obtain a restraining order. He explained the situation to the court and was granted the restraining order, which was supposed to limit Katherine's contact with him. However, Katherine completely disregarded the order and continued to act as she pleased. Some days later, John arrives home from work and follows his usual routine of greeting the neighbors before eventually falling asleep at 11 p.m. Katherine returns home shortly after, makes dinner, watches TV, takes a shower, and then wakes John up for sexual relations before they both go back to bed. He fell asleep while Katherine was wide awake. Unbeknownst to John, Katherine kept a butcher's knife in her nightstand next to the bed in one of the drawers. And then everything took a turn for the worse. She slowly opened the nightstand, grabbed the knife, and proceeded to stab John 37 times. Based on the blood evidence, it appeared that John had attempted to fight back and escape, but unfortunately, he did not survive. After the incident, she ingested a number of pills, laid down, either to attempt suicide or to stage a scene for the police. The true intentions remain unclear. The following day, John's colleagues were worried since he did not show up to work. They recalled John saying that if he didn't show up for work, they should contact the police because Katherine must have harmed him. So his colleagues, being caring individuals, contacted the police. The police decided to pay a visit to John's house in order to look into the matter. When they arrived, they noticed John's truck parked outside, indicating that he was likely home. After knocking on the door with no answer, they peered through the mail slot to try and catch a glimpse inside. Unfortunately, all they could see was a large curtain obstructing their view. With no response, the police made the decision to enter the residence. As soon as they entered, they could see blood splattered all over the place. It was clear that something had happened there. They were heading towards the large curtain they saw through the mail slot. The second police officer mistook it for a huge blanket blocking the path. Moving closer to the curtain, the police officer pushed it aside with his left arm. As he did that, his hands got wet. So he looked towards his hand to notice his arm was completely covered in blood. Upon closer inspection, they discover that the curtain is not a curtain, but skin hanging from the door frame. He then notices a headless torso on the ground. As he walks further, he sees blood splattered all over the walls and that the carpets on the floor is completely soaked in blood. When they walked into the kitchen, the officers noticed that food was being prepared, with plates containing vegetables and cooked meat. To search the house even more, they went upstairs through the hallway and heard someone snoring. It turned out to be Katherine sleeping on the bed. Despite the police officers' attempts to wake her, she didn't respond. Consequently, they lifted her, escorted her outside, and placed her on the backyard lawn. The police officers went back inside the house, and that's when they discovered more disturbing things. They noticed that pieces of skin were hanging from butcher's hooks on the doorframe. John's head was missing as his torso lay on the ground. They eventually found his head cooking on a stove in the kitchen. The forensic team arrived at the house soon after and immediately spotted the flesh and skin hanging from the meat hooks at the entrance. After analyzing the blood spatters, they concluded that John was attacked on the bed by Katherine, who stabbed him multiple times. John attempted to escape, leaving blood on the light switch as he tried to turn it on. The investigators also observed blood swipes down the hallway, indicating that John was trying to flee. Progressing down the hallway, they saw that the blood spatters were becoming smaller and smaller, suggesting his declining strength as he moved downward. Noticing blood on the front door screen, they concluded John had reached it. However, a trail of blood on the ground suggested Katherine had dragged him back to her intended location. In the lounge room, they discovered the torso in the largest pool of blood. It seemed Katherine had laid him on the ground there and proceeded to skin him with the skills she picked up when she was working at the butcher shop. After removing John's skin, she placed it on the carpet next to her. The outline on the floor showed that his head was still on his body when removed the skin. After she cut off his head, it was suspected that she took it to the kitchen, as evidenced by the blood stains that the investigators found. She sliced a large chunk of muscle from his back in the kitchen, dividing it into 5 smaller pieces resembling mini steaks. After that, she baked them in the oven at 350 degrees for approximately 45 minutes. The cops noticed she had prepared 4 plates, while the dog outside had the 5th piece of meat she had sliced. They also spotted the set table, indicating she was expecting dinner guests, with little name plates for each of his children. Katherine was clearly planning to have his kids over and serve them their own father. The police investigators said that after killing John, she took a shower, changed clothes, took his wallet, and ran errands. They confirmed this because John's bank card was used at 12 a.m. to withdraw money. They suspect Katherine took the card and withdrew $1,000, but her intentions with the money remain unknown. The money she took was never found, leading them to believe she buried it somewhere with plans to retrieve it later. The cops gathered all the items in the house that had blood on them or had been touched to be used as evidence. Katherine was soon arrested. However, she was in a coma for 5 days. As a result, they were unable to interview her until she regained consciousness. And when she did wake up and they began questioning her, she had no recollection of the events leading up to that point. Throughout the entire questioning, she remained tight-lipped. Eventually, she comes to terms with the fact that she was the one who ended John's life. She mentioned that it was a result of the continuous abuse she endured from him during their time together. Although she doesn't provide a clear explanation of the events, she does confess to the act of killing John. Katherine's brother later mentioned that she had informed him about her plan to murder John and avoid facing consequences by pretending to be insane, and that's exactly what she did. However, he didn't take her seriously, assuming she was joking at the time. Katherine initially pleaded not guilty in court, But later on during the trial, she switched her plea to guilty without providing any explanation. The judge was anxious about her sudden change of heart, knowing what she might be planning to do. And that's exactly what later happened. Her defense in the case was based on the fact that she entered a guilty plea due to her mental instability at the time. She maintained that she was not mentally competent to plead guilty, although she was aware of her actions. The psychiatrist conducted an evaluation and concluded that she was perfectly sane, despite her claims of being mentally unstable. During the court proceedings, she remained emotionless. And then suddenly she began behaving erratically, screaming and rocking back and forth in an attempt to appear mentally unstable, a stark contrast to her usual behavior. It was clear to everyone that she was simply putting on an act, trying to manipulate the situation, and the judge saw right through it. He was extremely intelligent. He was analyzing everything in an interview, stating that he knew exactly what she was doing. The judge ruled that she would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's the first woman in Australia to receive such a sentence. Nobody knows the full story of that night because Katherine has never spoken about it since. And nobody has a clue about what she did with the money. What happened when she walked out of the house? Katherine applied for an appeal in 2006, arguing that her life sentence was too harsh for her crime. Fortunately, the appeal was denied. The judges described her actions as the most horrific they had ever witnessed. Psychologists concluded that Katherine's murder of John was premeditated and driven by revenge. It also brought her perverse pleasure, as she seemed to enjoy the act.